Hello, I'm Lauren Goodrich, and I'm joined by Tack. Today we're going to be discussing Russia and the United States, as well as Syria and Ukraine. But as we speak, developments are happening at breakneck speed. So, we are only 2 days past Presidents Obama and Putin having their first sit down in over 2 years. And Russia has started air campaigns inside of Syria. So what is actually happening? What are the Russians doing inside of Syria at this moment?
So we've seen Russia actually put in place the equipment that they need for these operations for a while. We've seen it gradually build up. Now that they have a sufficient air contingent located inside Syria, it's natural that they get to the point of starting the strikes against the rebel NIS forces fighting the Syrian regime. What's notable, however, is that the strikes that we saw conducted today actually took place near Homs on rebels that are not actually part of IS. These are rebel groups that are affiliated to the anti-regime forces supported by Turkey. While not necessarily part of the core group supported by Turkey, they sit in the spectrum of rebel forces within Syria that address more of that Turkish and U.S. interest in the conflict.
So that's fairly symbolic by the Russians to make their very first official airstrikes not against IS.
That's very correct. And as we've seen this morning, this is causing quite some concern in the U.S., obviously, where we've seen plenty of statements come out of the Pentagon and U.S. policymakers on how Russia is not actually addressing the IS threat. And obviously, this is going to have a major impact on that relationship between the U.S. and Russia, even after that sit down with Obama.
Yes, this is Russia pretty much saying, okay, relations are at an all-time low. And that talks between the United States and Russia are pretty much breaking down all over again, even though we saw so many positive moves in the weeks leading up to the Obama and the Putin meeting. Shifting this to the discussions on Ukraine, it seems to me that the Russians are acting very aggressively when it comes to Syria, but on Ukraine they're acting very friendly. And from what we can see, it almost looks like the Russians are discounting the U.S. factor when it comes to Ukraine whatsoever and are instead turning to the Europeans. So they're going to be dealing with the United States both positively and negatively over Syria. But when it comes to Ukraine, they're going to be dealing with the Europeans instead. And so we have our meeting between the heads of France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia in Paris on this Friday. But what are we seeing on the actual battlefield leading into those talks?
So pretty much the way you've described, Russia in Ukraine has been playing very nice. We've seen them actually go through the motions to restrict the separatist actions. The separatists have been sticking to the ceasefire quite well. This is one of the longest stretches of such a low level of ceasefire violations that we've seen in a long time. On top of that, the negotiators in Minsk between the Ukrainians and the separatists have actually achieved the new agreement on the withdrawal of tanks as well as any artillery systems below a caliber of 100 millimeters.
And they're also discussing postponing the separatist elections, which was a major demand out of Kiev. So there's positive moves out of almost all three sides of the separatists, the Russians and the Ukrainians, to where it's almost as if Russia's playing good cop when it comes to Ukraine and it's playing bad cop when it comes to Syria.
No, that's very true. And it's of course very important to keep in mind that the theaters are entirely different. When it comes to Ukraine, as you mentioned, the more immediate need there is actually to talk to the Europeans, because those are the sanctions that are going to come up first when it comes to extensions. I think the Russians aren't expecting a release on the U.S. sanctions as early as they would be on Europe, so that makes a little more sense in the short term. While when it comes to Syria, that's very much a long game that Russia is playing there, propping up the Assad regime, trying to bring them to the table in negotiations. The different timelines on both of these issues pull them apart in terms of policy.
Well, it seemed that Russia was trying to leverage Syria at a time to get relief from the U.S. on the sanctions, but the U.S. has come out and has given no indication that they're going to be lifting sanctions. So it makes sense for Russia to play whatever game it wants to play to prove that it is still a world power and has a foothold in the Mideast at this time. Well, thank you, Tack. I know that there's going to be quite a few developments today and in the months to come. For more on this and other topics, please go to stratfor.com.